This scene is the next major engagement after the last video. I'm realizing just how packed Master and Commander is in that way. It feels like I only have to read a few pages ahead to get to the next action. This one is the biggest fight of Jack's command so far, as he takes on a convoy of 5 vessels and has to rely on more complex tactics to gain the advantage. This one also took a little bit longer to put together because I was working on a new Corvette model. I wanted to have a 3-masted vessel that I could use as an anonymous privateer, merchantman, or even a small frigate. It makes its first appearance in this video, and I hope to get some pretty good mileage out of it in the future. But with that, let's get into the scene. After the last action, the Sophie continues her cruise off Cape Creus and captures a French sloop laden with gunpowder, which she takes into Mahon. Following a brief resupply, she sets off toward Valencia, and then south down the Spanish coast. She continues a little beyond Cape Nao to exercise her guns, and then tacks to head back north. Though the Sophie just misses the Cacafuego in the night as it passes to the west, by morning she finds herself just inshore of a convoy of French and Spanish vessels making their way up the coast. And we'll join her just as William Babington wakes Jack to tell him.
"Sir! Sir!" piped Babington into Jack's ear. "Hush, sweetheart," murmured his captain, whose dreaming mind was occupied with quite another sex. "Eh? Mr. Dillon says top lights in the offing, sir." "Ha!" said Jack, instantly awake, and ran up onto the grey deck in his nightshirt. "Good morning, sir," said James, saluting and offering his night-glass. "Good morning, Mr. Dillon," said Jack, touching his nightcap in reply and taking the telescope. "Where away?" "Right on the beam, sir." "By God, you've good eyes," said Jack, lowering the glass, wiping it and peering again into the shifting sea haze. 2, 3, I think a 4th. The Sophie was lying there, hove to, with her foretopsail to the mast and her main topsail almost full, the one counterbalancing the other as she lay right under the dark cliff. The wind, what wind there was a puffy, unreliable air from the north-northwest, smelling of the warm hillside. But presently, as the land grew warmer, it would no doubt veer to the northeast, or even, frankly, into the east itself. Jack gripped the shrouds. "Let us consider the positions from the top," he said. "God damn and blast these skirts." The light increased. The thinning haze unveiled 5 vessels in a straggling line, or rather heap. They were all hull up, and the nearest was no more than a quarter of a mile away. From north to south they ran. First, the Gloire, a very fast ship-rigged Toulon privateer with 12 8-pounders, chartered by a wealthy Barcelona merchant named Jaime Mateo to protect his 2 settees, the Pardal and the Zalak of 6 guns apiece, the second carrying a valuable and illegal cargo of uncustomed quicksilver into the bargain. The Pardal lay under the privateer's quarter to leeward. Then, almost abreast of the Pardal but to windward, and only 400 or 500 yards from the Sophie, the Santa Lucia, a Neapolitan snow, a prize belonging to the Gloire, filled with disconsolate French royalists, taken on their passage to Gibraltar. Then came the second settee, the Zalak, and lastly a tartan that had joined the company of Alicante, glad of the protection from Barbary rovers, Minorcan letters of marque, and British cruisers. They were all smallish vessels. They all expected danger from the seaward, which was why they kept inshore, an uncomfortable, perilous way of getting along compared with the long course of the open sea, but one that allowed them to run for the shelter of coastal batteries. And if any of them noticed the Sophie in the stronger light, they said, "Why, a little brig creeping along close to the land," For Dania, no doubt. "What do you make of the ship?" asked Jack. "I cannot count her ports in this light. She seems a little small for one of their 18-gun corvettes, but at all events she is of some force, and she is the watchdog." Yes, that was certain. She lay there to the windward of the convoy as the wind veered and as they rounded the cape. Jack's mind was beginning to move fast. The flowing series of possibilities ran smoothly before his judgment. He was both the commander of that ship and of this sloop under his feet. "May I make a suggestion, sir?" "Yes," said Jack in a flat voice. "So long as we don't hold a council of war, they never decide anything." He had asked Dillon up here as an attention due to him for having detected the convoy. He really didn't want to consult him or any other man, and he hoped Dillon wouldn't break in on his racing ideas with any remarks whatever, however wise. Only one person could deal with this, the Sophie's master and commander. "Perhaps I should beat 2/4, sir?" said James stiffly, for the hint had been eminently clear. "You see that slovenly little snow between us and the ship?" said Jack, breaking across him. "If we gently square our foreyard, we shall be within 100 yards of her in 10 minutes, and she'll mask us from the ship. Do you see what I mean?" "Yes, sir." "With the cutter and the launch full of men, you can take her before she's aware. You make a noise, and the ship bears up to protect her. He has no way on him to tack, he must wear. And if you put the snow before the wind, I can pass through the gap and rake him once or twice as he goes round, maybe knocking away a spar aboard the settee at the same time. On deck there!" he called in a slightly louder voice. "Silence on deck! Send those men below." For the rumour had spread, and men were running up the forward hatchway. "The boarders away, then. We should be best advised to send all our black men. They're fine, lusty fellows, and the Spaniards dread them. The sloop cleared for action with the least possible show, and the men ready to fly to their quarters, but all kept below out of sight, all but a dozen. We must look like a merchantman." He swung over the edge of the top, his nightshirt billowing round his head. "The frappings may be cut, but no other preparation that can be seen." "The hammocks, sir?" "Yes, by God," said Jack, pausing. "We shall have to get them up precious fast if we're not to fight without 'em. A damned uncomfortable state. But do not let one come on deck until the boarders are away. Surprise is everything." Surprise, surprise. Stephen's surprise at being jerked awake with "Quarters, sir, quarters," and at finding himself in the midst of an extraordinarily intense muted activity. People hurrying about in almost pitch darkness, not a glim, the gentle clash of weapons secretly handed out, the boarders creeping over the landward side and into the boats by 2s and 3s, the boatswain's mates hissing, stand by for quarters, all hands stand by," in the nearest possible approach to a whispered shout. Warrant officers and petty officers checking their teams, quieting the Sophie's fools — she bore a competent share — who urgently wanted to know what and why. Jack's voice calling down into the gloom, "Mr. Ricketts! Mr. Babington!" "Sir?" "When I give you the word, you and the top men are to go aloft at once. To gallants and courses to be set instantly." "Aye, aye, sir." Surprise. The slow, growing surprise of the sleepy watch aboard the Santa Lucia, gazing at this brig as it drifted closer and closer. Did it mean to join company? "She's that Dane who's always plying up and down the coast," stated Jean Wiseacre. Their sudden, total amazement at the sight of 2 boats coming out from behind the brig and racing across the water. After the first moment's unbelief, they did their best. They ran for their muskets, they pulled out their cutlasses, and they began to cast loose a gun. But each of the 7 men acted for himself. and they had less than a minute to make up their minds. So when the roaring Sophies hooked on at the fore and main chains and came pouring over the side, the prize crew met them with no more than one musket shot, a couple of pistols, and a half-hearted clash of swords. A moment later, the four liveliest had taken to the rigging, one had darted below, and two lay upon the deck. Dillon kicked open the cabin door, glared at the young privateer's mate along a heavy pistol, and said, "You surrender?"
"Oui, monsieur,"
quavered the youth. "On deck," said Dillon, jerking his head. "Murphy, Buzzell, Thompson, King, clap onto those hatch covers. Bear a hand now. Davies, Chambers, Wood, start the sheets. Andrews, flatten the jib." He ran to the wheel, heaved a body out of the way, and put up the helm. The Santa Lucia paid off slowly, then faster and faster. Looking over his shoulder, he saw the topgallants break out in the Sophie, and in almost the same moment the foresail, mainstaysail, and boom mainsail. Ducking to peer under the snow's forecourse, he saw the ship ahead of him beginning to wear, to turn before the wind and come back on the other tack to rescue the prize. There was great activity aboard her. There was great activity aboard the three other vessels of the convoy, men racing up and down, shouts, whistles, the distant beating of a drum. But in this gentle breeze, and with so little canvas abroad, they all of them moved with a dream-like slowness, quietly following smooth, predestinate curves. Sails were breaking out all over, but still the vessels had no way on them, and because of their slowness he had the strangest impression of silence. A silence broken a moment later as the Sophie came shaving past the snow's larboard bow with her colours flying and gave them a thundering cheer. She alone had a fair bow wave, and with a spurt of pride James saw that every sail was sheeted home, taut and drawing already. The hammocks were piling up at an incredible speed. He saw two go by the board, and on the quarterdeck, stretching up over the nettings, Jack raised his hat high, calling, "Well done indeed, sir," as they passed. The boarders cheered their shipmates in return, and as they did so, the atmosphere of terrible, killing ferocity on the deck of the Snow changed entirely. They cheered again, and from within the snow, under the hatches, there came a generalized answering howl. The Sophie, all sails abroad, was running at close on 4 knots. The Gloire had little more than steerage way, and she was already committed to this wheeling movement, was already engaged upon the gradual curve downwind that would turn her unprotected stern to the Sophie's fire. There was less than 1/4 of a mile between them, and the gap was closing fast. But the Frenchman was no fool. Jack saw the ship's mizzen topsail laid to the mast, and the main and fore yards squared so that the wind would thrust the stern away to leeward and reverse the movement, for the rudder had no bite at all. "Too late, my friend, I think," said Jack. The range was narrowing. 300 yards. 250. "Edwards," he said to the captain of the aftermost gun, "fire across the settee's bows." The shot, in fact, went through the settee's foresail. She started her halyards, her sails came down with a run, and an agitated figure hurried aft to raise his colours and lower them emphatically. There was no time to attend to the settee, however. "Luff up," he said. The Sophie came closer to the wind. Her foresail shivered once and filled again. The Gloire was well within the forward traverse of the guns. "Thus, thus," he said, and all along the line he heard the grunt and heave as the guns were heaved round a trifle to keep them bearing. The crews were silent, exactly placed and tense. The spongers knelt with the lighted matches in their hands, gently blowing to keep them in a glow, facing rigidly inboard. The captains crouched, glaring along the barrels at that defenceless stern and quarter. Fire! The word was cut off by the roar. A cloud of smoke hid the sea, and the Sophie trembled to her keel. Jack was unconsciously stuffing his shirt into his breeches when he saw that there was something amiss. Something wrong with the smoke. A sudden fault in the wind, a sudden gust from the northeast sent it streaming down astern, and at the same moment the sloop was taken aback, her head pushed round to starboard. "Hands to the braces!" called Marshall, putting up the helm to bring her back. Back she came, though slowly, and the second broadside roared out. But the gust had pushed the Gloire's stern round too, and as the smoke cleared, so she replied. In the seconds between, Jack had had time to see that her stern and quarter had suffered. Cabin windows and little gallery smashed in, that she carried 12 guns, and that her colours were French. The Sophie had lost much of her way, and the Gloire, now right back on her original larboard tack, was fast gathering speed. They sailed along on parallel courses, close hauled to the fitful breeze, the Sophie some way behind. They sailed along, hammering one another in an almost continuous din and an unbroken smoke, white, grey-black, and lit with darting crimson stabs of fire. On and on. The glass turned, the bell clanged, the smoke lay thick, the convoy vanished astern. There was nothing to say, nothing to do. The gun captains had their orders, and they were obeying them with splendid fury, firing for the hull, firing as quickly as they could. The midshipmen in charge of the divisions ran up and down the line, bearing a hand, dealing with any beginning of confusion. The powder and shot travelled up from the magazine with perfect regularity. The boatswain and his mates roamed, gazing up for damage to the rigging. In the tops, the sharpshooters' muskets crackled briskly. He stood there reflecting. A little way to his left, scarcely flinching as the balls came whipping in or hulled the sloop, a great rending thump, stood the clerk and Ricketts, the quarterdeck midshipman. A ball burst through the packed hammock netting, crossed a few feet in front of him, struck an iron netting crane and lost its force on the hammocks the other side. An 8-pounder, he noticed, as it rolled towards him. The Frenchman was firing high, as usual, and pretty wild. In the blue, smokeless, peaceful world to windward, he saw splashes as much as 50 yards ahead and astern of them, particularly ahead. Ahead. From the flashes that lit the far side of the cloud, and from the change of sound, it was clear that the Gloire was forging ahead. That would not do. "Mr. Marshall," he said, picking up his speaking trumpet, "we will cross under her stern." As he raised the trumpet, there was a tumult and shouting forward. A gun was over on its side, perhaps two. "Avast firing there," he called with great force. "Stand by the larboard guns." The smoke cleared. The Sophie began to turn to starboard, moving to cross the enemy's wake and to bring her port broadside to bear on the Gloire's stern, raking her whole length. But the Gloire was having none of it. As though warned by an inner voice, her captain had put up his helm within 5 seconds of the Sophie's doing so, and now, with the smoke clearing again, Jack, standing by the larboard hammocks, saw him at his taffrail, a small, trim, grizzled man 150 yards away, looking fixedly back. The Frenchman reached behind him for a musket, and resting his elbows on the taffrail, he very deliberately aimed it at Jack. The thing was extraordinarily personal. Jack felt an involuntary stiffening of the muscles of his face and chest, a tendency to hold his breath, "The royals, Mr. Marshal," he said. "She's drawing away from us." The gunfire had died away as the guns ceased to bear, and in the lull he heard the musket shot part almost as if it had been in his ear. In the same second of time, Christian Pram, the helmsman, gave a shrill roar and half fell, dragging the wheel over with him, his forearm ploughed open from wrist to elbow. The Sophie's head flew up into the wind, and although Jack and Marshall had the wheel directly, the advantage was gone. The port broadside could only be brought to bear by a further turn that lost still more way. The Sophie was a good 200 yards behind the Gloire now, on her starboard quarter, and the only hope was to gain speed, to range up and renew the battle. He and the master glanced up simultaneously. Everything was set that could be set. The wind was too far forward for the studding sails. He stared ahead, watching for the stir aboard the Chase, the slight change in her wake that would mean a coming movement to starboard. The Gloire, in her turn, crossing the Sophie's stem, raking her fore and aft and bearing up to protect the scattered convoy. But he stared in vain. The Gloire held on to her course. She had drawn ahead of the Sophie even without her royals, but now these were setting, and the breeze was kinder to her too. As he watched, the tears brimming over his eyelids from the concentration of his gaze against the rays of the sun, a slant of wind laid her over, and the water ran creaming under her lee, her wake lengthening away and away. The grey-haired captain fired on pertinaciously, a man beside him passing loaded muskets, and one ball severed a ratlin 2 feet from Jack's head. But they were almost beyond musket range now, and in any case the indefinable frontier between personal animosity and anonymous warfare had been passed. It didn't affect him. "Mr. Marshal," he said, "pray edge away until we can salute her. Mr. Pullings? Mr. Pullings, fire as they bear." The Sophie turned 2, 3, 4 points from her course. The bow gun cracked out, followed in even sequence by the rest of the port broadside. Too eager, alas. They were well pitched up, but the splashes showed 20 and even 30 yards astern. The Gloire, more attentive to her safety than her honour, and quite forgetful of her duty to Seigneur Mathieu, the unvindictive Gloire did not yaw to reply, but hauled her wind. Being a ship, she could point up closer than the Sophie, and she didn't scruple to do so. Profiting to the utmost by the favour of the breeze, she was plainly running away. Of the next broadside, 2 balls seemed to hit her, and one certainly passed through her mizzen topsail, but the target was diminishing every minute as their courses diverged, and hope diminished with it. Eight broadsides later, Jack stopped the firing. They had knocked her about shrewdly, and they'd ruined her looks, but they'd not cut up her rigging to make her unmanageable, nor carried away any vital mast or yard, and they'd certainly failed to persuade her to come back and fight it out yardarm to yardarm. He gazed at the flying Gloire, made up his mind, and said, "We will bear away for the Cape again, Mr. Marshal, south-southwest." As he walked aft, taking off his coat as he went, the heat was suddenly unbearable, he ran his eye along the southwestern horizon. No sign of Cape Nao and the rising haze. Not a sail to be seen. He'd never noticed the rising of the sun, but there it was, well up into the sky. They must have run a surprising long way. By God, I could do with my coffee, he said, coming abruptly back into a present in which ordinary time flowed steadily once more and appetite mattered.